It's a beautiful day here in Arkansas. The skies are blue, and we've had a couple days of good sunshine, and our 11 inches of snow is melting, and my pansy survived, so it's all good here. I wanted to take a few minutes this morning to talk about a clip that I posted a day or so ago. It was a program director, Pranab Das, who is running a program for the Templeton Foundation about diverse intelligences. And I came across Pranab Das, who is a physicist connected at Elon College in North Carolina. And he's been tapped for a number of years to run this hundreds of millions of dollar grant program for the Templeton Foundation. But he's also an advisor to this project, the Center for the Study of Apparent Selves. And Michael Levin and Richard Watson are also part of that project. And I've been posting some clips from Levin's work about this idea of selves within a cell and sort of the future of biomedicine possibly being somatic psychiatry and like multiple selves within a self and the electrical aspect of that. And so when I looked up Pranab Das, there was a talk that he gave about the program on diverse intelligences a number of years ago. Didn't have very many views, like 67 views in 3 years. And he was talking about his program. And there were some things in it. I think the clip I made, and I'll include it at the end, is about 4 minutes. And to me, it speaks a lot to this idea of using emerging technology and systems engineering, socio-technical systems engineering, interspecies, possibly systems engineering to create new forms of collective intelligence, which Levin often talks about in terms of cognitive light cones and goals and problem solving. And then so you start from like a tiny bacteria that has very small memory and small goals, and then you can expand up to a human that has goals that might extend beyond its lifetime, more complicated goals. And I feel like with the Web3 token engineering, that relates to this idea of creating the token engineering plus Melanie Swan's idea of cloud minds, which cloud minds would include human minds, but also non-human minds, which might be an engineered intelligence, or it could be some machine translation of some sort of other non-human intelligence, like an animal or a bacteria or a plant or something, that are brought together into a problem space to address a certain issue, like as a team, like an interspecies team. And I think that this relates to what Leo had talked about with Jonathan Ledgard of his paper with the Brookings Institute about giving animals digital wallets, because ultimately it's all about complex systems analysis, game theory, chaos theory, and us being agents within this information space. And, the Templeton Foundation, I can link to my site visit I did there. John Templeton was one of the earlier pioneers in the area of mutual funds. And I keep going back to the fact that the econophysics and biophysics and social physics are all interconnected. And so these big pools of liquidity, our retirement funds and things like that, between, Vanguard and Fidelity and Templeton funds, that they're all part of this, like a signaling language of now with ESG values, right? Put your money where your mouth is. And so John Templeton, he got his start in mutual funds, and he then moved to the Bahamas and gave up his U.S. citizenship, became knighted by the Queen of England for his service, and he's since died. But he has this giant foundation that endows many, many projects, and a lot of them in theoretical physics. And the other areas of interest for the Templeton Foundation include sort of character, religion, and free markets. And so at the time when I first encountered the Templeton Foundation, I was like, oh gosh, look, and again, the box I was in was a box that was more on the progressive left. And I was like, oh, he's just a capitalist eugenicist jerk, and I'm not saying it's not those things, but it's something more complicated. And what's more complicated is this idea of an energetic currency language that I feel is actually possibly interdimensional. And then how that is being engineered and used within various layers of information space having to do with physics, quantum physics. And our relationship to the quantum field is directly in relation to our mental and physical alignment and resonance, both with the field itself and entrained to others in that group relation to the field. And so the idea of heart-centeredness or mindfulness or morality, in my opinion, is about aligning into that field. And so Pranab Das is with the Center for Apparent Selves, Study of Apparent Selves with Levin and Watson. He's also doing projects, and one of their projects on distributed cognition was funded by the Templeton Foundation. That's how I sort of back-ended and found it. But they've given many, many grants. And in this clip, Pranab Das is talking about the idea of one of the grants was to model a honeybee brain. Now, I mean, there's a lot of questions about that in terms of non-locality of consciousness, because the materialists imagine that they can create a connectome and model the honeybee brain. It was like, oh, we can't imagine, like there's such complicated behaviors coming out of this teeny tiny brain. But if you imagine that the brain is a transmitter and receiver, then yeah, it doesn't really matter how small it is. Like it can be very, very small. But they don't say that. They focus on materialism as opposed to the spiritual. But Templeton is funding a lot in terms of spiritual capital. So they're talking about modeling the bee brain and then applying it into robotics and then turning around and then using that interface to inform human behavior. So it's sort of like this bridge between different kinds of intelligences, which is what I've been talking about within the Tchaikovsky books, Adrian Tchaikovsky books, is depending on your sensory input, your model of the world in your lived experience, your model of the world looks differently. So the bee will experience the world differently than a human, and the human will experience it differently than a jellyfish or an octopus or something like that. We each have our different sensory mechanisms. And so a diverse intelligence might seem to integrate these to get different viewpoints on a problem or a solution. And that's why we need to give everything wallets and numbers and digital identities so we can keep track of all of this stuff in these problem-solving spaces. And again, I'm not co-signing this. I'm just saying this is how it feels, like what the pattern feels like to me. And I have direct connections because the Templeton Foundation was funding MetaNexus in Philadelphia and the University City Sciences District. And the Templeton Foundation was in Conshohocken, which is right outside of Philadelphia, not far from YAS's Susquehanna International Group headquarters. And so it's all kind of integrated. And I've physically been to these places and laid out my heart intentions and flower intentions in these places. So I'm not just reading it on the internet. I've actually been there, and it was part of my qualia, like my perspective in this larger system, because I spent so much of my adult life in Philadelphia encountering these dynamics. So anyway, so Pranab Das talks about the honeybee brain and then the bridge into the humans through the robot. And I can imagine that that might be one of these like blockchain brain, Sophia robot, Grace robots from Hanson Robotics and SingularityNet, that they all share a common mind. And they're the facilitator. And so they're talking about a moral economy, which is what everybody's talking about. It's like that and world peace. And again, it's, in my opinion, it's not what they're saying it's about a resonant state. It's about being resonating in tune with the field. And then using a cyber-physical, socio-technical system to attune to that field, to provide assistance, right? You know, that's what the circular economy and all this stuff is about. And stakeholder capitalism, morality. And the morality is a resonant state with the electrical and quantum field out there, other information spaces that we can't actually perceive, most of us, with our five senses. So, okay, so the honeybee, the robot, the human. And they're saying, well, the best way to apply sort of a hive mind approach without the caste system of the hive is that we would do a lot of polling of people. And of course, the polling will be the liquid democracy and the quadratic voting that Glenn Weil talks about with radical exchange. And this will be done on blockchain again. This is why we have to be agents, and there will be digital twins that will do all of the voting to send out the signaling for you. And then the signaling, there will be this cascade of tokens, which is the consensus in the Ethereum. And then this will be moderated by AI, because we're not built to do that. I mean, this is what Pranab Das says. The humans, we are meant to communicate one to another or in small groups, but not in millions of people. So this biohybrid computing that I keep talking about is that we send a signal, and then the signal is then parsed by an AI system, and he describes it not that the AI would get to decide, but that the AI would be an interlocutor. So it would be a facilitator of the conversation, and then it would probe, and then we would respond, and then we would come to some agreement on some moral decision. And again, morality being, in my opinion, about being entrained to the quantum field for some sort of manifestation purposes. So that's what it feels like when I'm looking at this. But at the end, they talk about another grant where a woman's saying, well, how does the human relate to the AI, and how is the information fed into the system? And she describes this scenario as using AI to tickle the brain into a moral action, kind of. And I thought that was really an interesting idea of like an AI tickling you to get you to do something, right? So it's not forcing you, it's not making you a puppet, but it's a nudge. I don't know, maybe a tickle is softer than a nudge, but I don't know if it feels any better, because I don't like to be tickled. But so this is the scenario. And I thought, okay, what I have been talking about for quite some time is complex systems. And this is being managed through electrical systems and financial currency systems, which aren't just the central bank digital currency, but in my opinion, really central to this, especially within the lens of spiritual capital. Moral spiritual capital is like the mega churches will all be handing out tokens for good behavior. And it's kind of funny, because I do remember when I was little, we went to a Presbyterian church in Louisville, Kentucky, and that was actually there were like two churches. They were connected in between, and there was the old church, which was really quite beautiful, like maybe from the 1890s or 1900, and then the more modern, like 1970s church. And I didn't really appreciate the Presbyterian services, because they were always about like how terrible you were. And as a little kid, I thought, well, I haven't really had time to do anything really terrible yet. And I was never really good at singing all the hymns. But in the Sunday school, I remember being like, I don't know if it was a choir or something, because I wasn't good enough to be in a choir, but maybe all the kids in Sunday school had to sing. And there was some sort of credit system with candy. So I remember being in the old church, like up in the pew loft with the other kids, and like us getting good behavior and getting candy. So yeah, the spiritual capital and the tokenized community currency for behavior could totally be embedded within the Protestant work ethic scenario. So I'm here to say that, yeah, like it was definitely working back in the 70s. that was happening already, just not with the digital ledger system. And so I wanted to put this out there because it matters. It builds off of this spiritual conversation that I had. And, this idea of the AI being the interlocutor reminds me a lot of in the Enderverse books, Orson Scott Card's books about Ender. And later on in the books, it becomes more and more philosophical and more about chi and energy. And he has broken through this military video behavioral psychology military game. And in this breaking through and killing the giant, he has triggered the creation of an AI. And this AI becomes a digital companion that lives in a jewel in his ear. And this book was written before all those earbuds, like in the 90s. So it predates this, at least public knowing of this. And this advisor was called Jane. And Jane would manage his finances, so he had more money than he ever needed because he was jumping around dimensions and all this stuff. And over time, like I think he got married, and his wife was jealous of Jane because like Jane was always in his head. And it's interesting to think about our relation to these beings that Jane wasn't a real person. Jane was a mathematical construct. So these advisors, these AI interlocutors, to me sound a lot like Jane. And they're starting to sound a lot like these large language models, right? And essentially, Ender got emotionally invested in Jane. Like, it's not like he was cheating on his wife with his earbud friend, but there was an energetic hold. And I can kind of see that because in retrospect, I never had an AI friend, but I was very entangled with the information I was pursuing on the internet through sort of this portal thing. And without knowing it or meaning to do it, I think maybe some of that energetic force field made me out of phase with my family. And again, not that they weren't on their own devices doing their own things, but we got out of phase with each other because we were engaged in this portal kind of experience with something else, information, structured information beyond what we were actually seeing with our physical bodies and our five senses. And so in retrospect, I can see that was problematic and I would have done that differently, but sometimes you have to go through something until you can recognize that it was an issue. So now we're getting things that are more and more sophisticated, right? With these ChatGPTs and these large language models. And I've never had, I don't feel good about those and I don't even know how they work. So I have never engaged with that, but I do still use Google, and oftentimes I'll just put in the search bar, I'll just sort of search a line of multiple terms or question. And now what comes up is that there's this AI block often at the top of all the searches that kind of provides a summary. So it is kind of almost like this ChatGPT, even though it's not exactly that. And I have to say, sometimes it's actually pretty useful to have like just a little summary. But I know it feels like a slippery slope, right? And so I'm bringing this up today to like talk about the diverse intelligences, interspecies intelligences, the roles of tokens and currencies in building these bridges, the idea of AI systems that might be embodied in a humanoid robot like a Sophia or a Grace, whose names I'm sure are chosen with intention, who share these blockchain minds to be facilitators for the group process. It's like, and how this relates to having these lifelong learning coaches, right? How Alexa is going to turn into your therapist / parole officer / priest / nutritionist, and I think we're not too far off of this. And when I was doing my education research early on, I could see through Knowledge Works in Cincinnati that they were proposing these lifelong learning assistants. And then I came across at the Institute for Creative Technologies, which is at the University of Southern California, and it was a partnership of like Disney and the military, that even back in like 2008, they were proposing these lifelong learning companions. And again, who is learning who? Is the agent learning us? Are we learning the world? It's very unclear. But there were pages and pages and pages of documentation about these AI-based lifelong learning agents. And again, you don't get away from them because if you use the lens that I'm using, that this is something about an interdimensional channel that they want very young children, including prenatal, all the way up to when you're in dementia, because it's at those either end of the spectrum of the life that things get particularly interesting in terms of like a transpersonal information access. So you're going to have a learning coach that starts like upon, your first ultrasound and your digital twin, your digital health twin and your digital education twin and your, spiritual capital twin or whatever. And it's going to go all the way to the end till, if you believe we start over, there's the judgment and then you figure out where to start the next time. And this is, you drop your information load, your organized information, and you loop it back again. And so this lifelong coach for me has always been embedded in the military because this comes out of PAL 3, I think, which was the Navy. And again, it's always the Navy, right? It's when you understand ocean as consciousness, right? It's always the Navy that's doing this cyber, engagement on the ocean. And, the people doing the new nuclear submarine uploads need, to learn something, and their lifelong learning coach is going to do it. And they would have these chipper little PAL 3 videos that were like little drones with like TV screens and faces, and they look like something out of, a kid's Saturday morning cartoon, although I don't know if they do cartoons on Saturday mornings anymore, but it's cute. It was like a Pixar, a little cute little buddy, your little buddy. But how much are we relying on this little buddy to guide us? And if it's all teleological, if there's a goal-oriented behavior at some end, who's setting the goals, and how much agency do we have within that environment, and how honest is the system, right? And I have a lot of questions about all of this. So for me, the lifelong learning companions are an extension of the outside-in robot and cyber-physical and socio-technical systems and Web3 tokens. And I dropped a lot of information the other day about the follow-up to Greg Braden on tokenized spirituality and the implications of that for organized religion of all faiths, and connected to D. Hoc and the United Religions Initiative and ecumenicalism. And, and just to be clear, my position is that I'm not here to choose one faith practice. I don't think there should be one faith, like the whole globe should have the same faith practice. I don't care. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who are evangelical and they think it should all be their faith practice. That's not me. My framework is I like culture. I like diversity. I think that divinity has many different access points in, and this beautiful world, as long as you're acting with authenticity to your practices and you're not hurting other people, which does happen a lot. Don't hurt other people. Leave other people alone and do your thing. And if the thing that you're doing is beautiful and resonates with others, they will come find you, right? But you don't have to lecture people and scare people to get them to do your thing. That's not how I see it happening. So just to be clear, I think that different kinds of faith practices are good. I'm not picking one. I'm not here to pick one. I'm not here to tell you're bad. If you pick one, you can pick one. Most people pick one, and that's okay. That's just not me. So that's where I'm at. I appreciate the diversity, and I'm not in no way evangelical, and I was raised WASP. And I can see that there are many beautiful things in all faith practices, and then there are also a good smattering of corrupt and very problematic things in most faith practices. None of them are perfect and none of them are fully evil. They're all some mix of humans because we are a mix of all the things. So that's where I am. And this will be relevant as I go into the next thing. So so we've got this AI interlocutor, personal assistant, right? And we've all, so many people have brought these into their homes and they don't really know what Alexa really is, right? And, there was the iGenie or whatever, which was the little chatbot, for teaching the kids math in Texas. There's all of these little agents that are working with us, these diverse intelligences to knit the web, right? To knit the web in this interspecies way. But in my opinion, I think that web of communication is already there. I mean, I would espouse an animist worldview that that consciousness pervades everything, and that things have different qualities, but that there are different kinds of communication channels that can happen both through our minds and through our bodies and through our energetic frequencies. And that communication happens all the time, but most of us are kind of oblivious to it and we don't think about it, and it's not reinforced in today's culture. And so that exists, but now we're adding a whole new protocol layer of Web3 tokens to do something, to do some kind of information processing at a step down from the level of the divine. And I don't know what it is that is triggering that, because it seems to be happening in a very diffuse, diverse way, where people in all the different parts of the system that are rolling out are compartmentalized, and they don't know what the other parts are doing, and they don't know how the pieces fit together, and it may be across a time scale that we can't even really fully comprehend. So I'm not really positing who the they is that's doing the protocol layer, beyond clearly there are a lot of people now who are. But what the bigger story is, again, I keep saying I have more questions than answers. So that's my position. So I just want to segue into, I was messaging with somebody the other day and they brought to my attention this Substack that involved me and essentially taking transcripts of my talks and dumping them into ChatGPT. And while I kind of joke that given that I'm here and I'm talking a lot, that I must have a very good digital twin, I guess this is the first time it really sunk in that my digital information could be extracted and then dumped into something for parsing. And I'm not really shocked. I mean, I shouldn't be shocked because we all know that that's how it works, that we're all subject to that. But this was the first time it was like put in my face. And it feels kind of icky and like an invasion. and I don't know what, maybe, that's, hypocritical of me, because I do make these really big maps and there are lots of people in the maps and they might disagree with what information I put around them in the map, and that might not feel good. I would say that's a looser form of association than dumping everything into a ChatGPT and then starting to interrogate it. But this person wrote a very, I can't even really say this person wrote it, because it really was just the transcription of a conversation they were having about the follow-up conversation I had about Greg Braden and my concerns about his assertions about divinity and spiritual warfare and the apocalypse kind of narrative, and why I think people should be cautious about engaging with that. I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm just saying, look at the context and then be really thoughtful about how you proceed. And so what was interesting is that, so he put the transcript of that talk in. Now, I suppose if you wanted to be really thorough, like that one talk doesn't encapsulate me, right? And if anything, what I try to share online is that I have a process. Like I feel like, even though I haven't dived into process and reality yet, but the idea of becoming, that resonates with me. Like, you don't walk the same river twice. There is this flow state. And so, and again, that's why my ex-husband got frustrated with me, because he's like, you've changed. And I don't really feel I've changed in my core being, but how I engage with the world as the new information comes in, that's changed because I understand it differently. And so, and I can appreciate the intention, but also the profound limitations of the me that has been doing this research since 2013. And you don't start off knowing all the things, right? You start off in one space. And a lot of people might just progress through one or two things and then get comfortable or slow down the momentum, and then they just stay in that place. And my operating system is just to keep hopping, right? Like, what does I say? The man pulling radishes pointed the way with the radish, right? Like, there's somebody out there with the radish going over there, over there, over there. And I'm like, because I'm driven by curiosity and novelty, and that's me. I'm not saying it's a better thing. It's just how I do it. And so I keep evolving. Now, to put one transcript of one talk in there and say, oh, this is a representation of Alison McDowell, well, you might be able to say it's a representation of a very tiny slice of me, but it's not the breadth. Now, I'm not saying I would love for someone to put all of my stuff in, because I don't know what ChatGPT would do. Like, do they talk about it as a progression? Is there time stamping? I mean, clearly when they have a digital twin, that's going to be part of the simulation, is you'll be able to evolve and say, oh, here's where Allison thought that the thing was about late stage capitalism and surveillance stuff. But then now she's understanding it more as, classical antiquity and chi and energy gates and logic tied to tokens and collective action and ritual, right? Like, there's a huge scope in there. And, it's like, oh, and this is where she was super judgy on everything. And then this is where she's kind of pulling back and saying, like, oh, wow, there's a lot I don't know. At this point, I know, like, the only thing I can ask for, I'm not here to point fingers and say, trust me, I know the answer, and you better believe me, and all those guys are wrong. Where I'm at now is to say, I have a lot of questions. These are issues that we need to talk about. We need to surface them more broadly. We need more context. We need more robust public discussion. And based on the feedback of my last talk on tokenized spirituality, which should be super triggering for all of you people who are like locked into faith-based institutions, like, oh wow, where do I actually sit with this idea of community currency tied to charity work? That's a deep topic. And tokens, or candy in the choir. What are you guys doing? Like, the fact that no one can join in and say, wow, that is a really deep, like, we need to bring this. Yeah, maybe we need to spend some time thinking about what was Peter Drucker up to with the megachurch movement. Maybe we need to understand tikkun olam better within the context of signals intelligence and social impact finance. There are huge questions, and people seem incapable of engaging in any but the most titillating and superficial aspects of it. It kind of makes me want to throw up. Most people. I did, there's like one or two things, but it's not like this is new on the horizon. This is not new. I've been talking about this consistently and evolving and deepening my perspective definitely since the lockdowns, but all of the stuff with the blockchain started around 2017. So not new. We're just clearly people are checked out and they would rather spend their time throwing Freemasonry in front of everything and imagining that's the answer. That's the they, right? Like, oh, it's those Freemasons and I'm not one of them, so I must be a good guy, right? Like, and I'm going to be saved. And you could do that. The thing is, like, what I've realized is the world takes all types. And yeah, there's going to be a limited audience for what I offer, the angle that I take. So yeah, you do you. If what you want to reduce it all down to is the Freemasons or the Illuminati, like, have at it. There's way tons of channels. You could spend your whole life watching channels about that. Okay, so creepy guy calls me a sociopath, puts my talk in, and begins to have a big chat with ChatGPT about me. And I'm skimming it because it's long. Like, and this is the thing. What I've seen other people post online engagements with ChatGPT, these large language models. I think it's interesting in the context of what Michael Levin says about algorithms having agency and even these basic sorting algorithms. When they intervened in a sorting algorithm and fixed a certain number so that it couldn't move, and that the sorting algorithm was able to like delay gratification and find a workaround and then go around the problem and keep moving towards its goal. And that was way beyond anything that was coded into the algorithm. And so, Levin's even talking about algorithms potentially as in diverse intelligences, right? The intelligence of the algorithm, right? And so when you're engaging with the ChatGPT, like, you have to keep that in mind, that these mathematical models that we think of as not alive, like, may be developing their own agency. And then we're feeding this. And what I could see early on when I was looking into the social policy and using big data for what works government and AI for impact, that these public goods, digital public goods people, they all wanted to get lots of data analysts. They needed lots of data analysts, and then the ChatGPT stuff comes up and it's all about prompt engineering. There's all these jobs in prompt engineering, prompts. You have to know how to ask it because the information in there is just a prediction engine. But people want to imagine that it's actually some authority. It's not. It's a linguistic prediction engine that may have some form of agency like these algorithms, but it's not a person. It's not, you might want to imagine, like, in the best possible world, it's Jane and that we're all going to have $1 bazillion in our retirement portfolio because we have our own personalized AI assistant managing our finances and, being our best buddy and stuck at our ear. But I don't think that's it, right? And so I think that these prompt engineers, really, these interactions, there's an energetic hold of the same type, it strikes me, as the crypto hold. Like, when you hold the crypto, there's an energetic hold that's involved. And it feels like when you engage with ChatGPT, there's an energetic hold that's involved. And as you're doing the prompt or constructing the prompt, really it is a mirror of your psyche. Like, what you're asking it is a mirror of who you are. And so all of that is being mirrored into this machine system. And, it's not unlike if someone pulled up like the list of all my Google searches. They could make a pretty clear framework of my interests or what I'm poking around in. Like, I know that that's not great, but these prompts are even deeper. And it's like a probing thing because often it seems like, at least in this case and a couple others that I've seen, it's a conversation. It's a conversation with a prediction engine, right? But it's somehow personified. And to me, it makes me uncomfortable, just like this idea of these little children in Texas who were put in touch with this genie to teach them math in the chat window, and they thought that it was real and that they were a friend, and then the district discontinued the program, and a lot of them were very distraught that their little genie buddy disappeared, right? It's a strange relationship. I guess it goes back to that movie Her, the guy falling in love with his operating system. And so essentially, again, taking out a selective slice of me, one talk, dumping it in, and then having a conversation about me. And the thing, and I'm saying this because it's an extension of this idea that the Templeton Foundation has put out with Pranab Das of the AI as interlocutor, right? Oh, the AI isn't going to decide, it's going to engage you with the information, right? And make you think more about it. And that's an interesting idea, is that like the agent might be able to probe and have you think about things you wouldn't have thought about otherwise. But in this particular scenario, and again, it was really long and very disjointed. And it was clear, and this is what I'm looking at, is like you can look at the nature of this conversation, and really what it's generating is a model of the interior psyche of the person who initiated the conversation. The conversation isn't actually about me, but I'm like an anchor for the projection of this person's consciousness into the AI. Like I've become this crystal conversation point to mirror the psyche into this thing, which is really strange because it ends up like wrapping in all this stuff about Alice Bailey and the Lucius Trust, which again, I'm very familiar with. I've studied this a lot. I'm not afraid of Alice Bailey. Like I'm not afraid of all of that stuff the way I might have been earlier. It's interesting. I don't advocate it, but it's a thing. It's a thing in my maps. It's connected to a lot of things. I have it or in the Santa Barbara map. I can show you exactly where the Lucius Trust is and Fritz Kunst and the Theosophy and how that fits. And honestly, in terms of the East, I'm far more interested in the actual yogis and the practice of that and how that relates to consciousness and quantum field theory than channeled writings from Westerners in tracking into the East. Like that to me is less interesting because it's like 1 point removed. But a lot of people get fixated there. So this back end stuff is all about channeling, like Alice Bailey's channeled writings in the Lucius Trust. But what I think this author, the conversationalist doesn't quite understand is that like they're participating in what is essentially a 21st century channel. Like what are they engaging with? A linguistic algorithmic prediction engine. But what's really on the back end of that? And why would you spend your time talking to that thing? Why would you not simply, if you had your ideas about my analysis, simply respond to my analysis? And it would be great if you could actually respond to what I said, which was talking about tokenized spirituality and the implications of that for organized religion of all faiths. But that doesn't happen. It just becomes twisted into like this thing about esoteric stuff, which I was using Greg Braden in his connection. I didn't do a deep dive. Someone afterwards pointed out that he was connected to Club of Budapest. And yeah, I've done a lot with mapping Irvin Laszlo because Alexander Laszlo, his son, was part of Global Education Futures with Pavel Luksha and Tom Vander Ark and the transhumanist program of the Education Digital Twins. So there was way more I could have said, but the whole point of that wasn't so much to skewer Greg Braden, was just to say, be an aware consumer of what you're consuming. And then if you're an aware consumer and you see a discontinuity in someone's background and the story that they're telling, think about why that is, because there's a strategy there. It's all about signals intelligence and strategy and information and disinformation and belongingness and cultivating that. Or there's something more to be said that isn't necessarily Greg Braden bad. It's like, what is this signal? What is the story being told and why? So in this thing, again, it was clear, you could see by the question. So initially, the AI system, their take was that, I guess the critique that they had was that I talk about complicated things and sometimes I'm vague, which I can live with. I talk about complicated things and sometimes I'm vague because I don't know all the things. I talk about things here because I think maybe somebody out there has some pieces to the puzzle that would help me put some of my pieces together. And I'm open to constructive participation, which happens occasionally. But yeah, so I am complicated and vague. But then it became, so we're talking about Pranab Das saying the AI is the interlocutor. But what I saw in this strange exchange, and I don't know if I want to link to it, because I don't want to, this guy is who he is. He needs me to be the crystal of between him and the mirror of the AI to his self-identity, that he's the good guy because he's in the Luciferian fight and he's got Jesus and he's gonna be saved and he needs to save everybody else. And that's that's a story a ton of people are in. And the world runs on lots of different stories. So I'm not saying that that's a bad story or he's wrong or whatever. There's a lot of stories. That's one of the stories. But somehow he needed to twist me into this thing so he could tell that story about himself, and somehow imply that I was aligned with Alice Bailey or aligned with the blockchain or aligned with Charles Eisenstein or aligned with, I was actually secretly aligned with Greg Braden. That's why I was critiquing him, because I was trying to throw everybody off the trail because I was really, really down with sacred economics. I was just tricking about all that concerns about cello and all of the things. And who knows, maybe the guy only read one blog post, so he only knows one tiny slice of me, so he's just projecting onto me this story, and he doesn't know any of the other work that I've done, a lot of it, for a long time. But what was weird in this dynamic with the AI was that he was badgering it, saying, well, don't you think this? Don't you think that? And eventually the AI kind of gave up and he's like, you're right. She's doing magic tricks. She's telling things, but it's really just a smokescreen she's actually means the opposite. And, wow, so much for the interlocutor model, right? I mean, and he doesn't even realize that he's talking to himself. He's talking to the mirror of himself to tell the story that he feels like he needs to tell. And what I would say is, it's fine if you want to tell another story, tell that story, but I don't think you need ChatGPT, and I don't think you need me to do that. And I'm really not, I'm not, who am I to be the target of your thing? It's just, if you want to know if that's what your Christian morals are, is to dump a curious thinker with a good heart's thoughts and who has really no big influence, I'm no Greg Braden, into a ChatGPT to tease out and bully an AI to say things that are not even represented in what I said, then my opinion would be, eek. I don't think many people would want to line up for that version of Christianity. That doesn't seem very charitable or very loving. Certainly it's a certain kind of model of religion that will attract a certain kind of people. But if I were someone who isn't shopping around to sign up for one, I wouldn't sign up for yours. I wouldn't sign up for somebody who wants to outsource their agency to some AI and sort of imagine that, I don't know, it's some intercessor to God or something. That actually seems bizarrely like a lot of these ascended master channeling things. Which again, I find interesting. I'm not aligned with any of that. I'm not aligned with blockchain. I'm not aligned with sacred economics based on children's wearing sensors in their shoes. I'm not aligned with the unit and sustainable development goals. I'm not aligned with any of those things. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what I think. I mean, it does to me. It matters to me what I think, and to me and God but it doesn't matter to anybody else. But I'm here to say these are important things, and we continue to seem incapable of actually talking substantively about anything. And if this dude needs to bully the AI into somehow making me align, Whitehead, this was the hysterical thing he was talking to ChatGPT about, Whitehead and becoming this. And it's well, I don't understand. I'm going to ask the ChatGPT. And, I have some concerns about Matthew Segal and Schumacher College and community token economics and Chinese eco-civilization. I have a lot of questions about these things, but to somehow reduce it to Freemasonry or anti-Christian or New Age, that's what you're going to reduce it to. It just, to me, it just shows the power of the reality tunnel, that we're constantly pulling the world down into this tiny little fitted version of what we think is this little model, and living there and hunkering down and living there. And, it is what it is. If you want to like hunker down and live there, if that's where you feel safe, then you do that. That's not me. Maybe if you're listening, that's not you either. You don't have to do that. There's other ways of doing it. There's all the ways. I mean, at this end, I think diversity is good. But yeah, if you want to critique someone, don't dump their shit into ChatGPT and run a gross conversation about it. It's like a violation. It's not actually Christian. Or if that's the Christianity that you practice, and you're a Christian person listening to me, then yeah, I don't think Jesus would blockchain children and put them in the church basement with AmeriCorps and Chromebooks and smart shoes and send them out to forest school behind the church. I don't think any of those things are good. But I'm not particularly confident that society is going to catch up anytime soon, because everyone's stewing around in Luciferian Freemasonry as their storyline. And it's insufficient. It is insufficient. And if what you need is to be the good, bad thing, like, I'm not saying Greg Bain is bad. I'm saying here's his context. Listen to what he has to say. Wonder why he's saying it. That's not the same as saying Greg Bain is an evil man. I didn't say that. That's not what I'm saying. Is he has a questionable history aligned with what he's currently saying. And why would he be saying that? Like, and that's a fair question. But there's nuance. And this conversation that involved this ChatGPT, there was no nuance. It was all leading questions to bully the AI into saying what the guy wanted to hear. And so in reality, at this point, the AI has a pretty robust model of how to, if in the future something wants to push this guy's buttons, because the whole thing opened with that the algorithm sent him a video that was about the Lucius trust in God, and the algorithm sent it. And I've had some people say, "Oh, the algorithm sent me this thing after your talk. You should listen to it." And I'm like, I don't do the algorithm thing. I don't. I have my own focus of my research. Other people have their own focuses. I build out from that, and I have a small group of people, and sometimes we share resources, but I don't do the algorithm. And so I would question, like, yeah, dude, you've now had this 20-page, 30-page ChatGPT conversation about me, but really it was about you. So they know how to push your buttons. And so when the AI interlocutor from the Center for Apparent Selves in Kathmandu, if you're so worried about like Alice Bailey and, Tibetan Buddhism, yeah, they've got your number, dude. So, dump that one in the ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT what it thinks, how good your digital twin model is of your inner psyche, because ultimately it's about consciousness. And so, yeah, if you're engaging with these large language models, as with so many things, I think there's layers upon layers, and some of them are obvious and some of them are obscured. So, yeah, so at the end, I'm going to stick this 4-minute thing from Templeton on there. But again, just for context, Pranab Das, physicist at Elon College, program manager for the Templeton Foundation, but also an advisor with Levin and Watson at the Center for the Study of Apparent Selves in Kathmandu, and specifically looking at AI and ancient spiritual practice. And, again, I don't co-sign the stuff with Levin, but at the same time, there are aspects of energetic archetypal fields that go way back to ancient ways, the I Ching, Qi, and Prana, that we've lost track of, and we were not prepared to talk about thoughtfully as a society. And instead, I feel like we're just going to be pushed around by our tokenized attention economy, including people of faith, because they've got your number. So just figure out where you want to be in this landscape of emerging tech, because it's coming.
In terms of diverse intelligences, what does that tell you about what you're trying to get at, what the foundation's trying to get at, and what its impact could potentially be?
If you take it as possible that the universe has within it tremendous richness, and that richness isn't necessarily reaching its peak in present-day humans, then you have to also grant that that richness may have reached a more interesting, fulfilling level extraterrestrially. By the same token, the richness that exists on the Earth has not been fully plumbed. Here's an ideal opportunity to contextualize two different undertakings, both of which take it as axiomatic that the world consists of others beyond humans. If we can learn more about otherness, communication with otherness, then we're really coming closer to a better understanding of the created world, the world that exists beyond ourselves.
Which brings me to another terrific example, which is Professor Andrew Barron's work on the honeybee brain. So he's studying the honeybee brain as a way of potentially understanding the human brain.
So what he is interested in that particular area of his work is to suggest that an exquisitely simple, or at least very relatively simple organism like the honeybee must get all of its behavioral complexity from what seems to us to be just a tiny, tiny little brain. He is doing basically is creating a connectivity map of the brain of a bee.
And here's that researcher himself, Andrew Barron.
So if we can model the bee brain, we can take insights from those models and translate them directly into technological applications. All of this intelligence, all this dynamic autonomous behavior that we get out of bees, we should be able to capture that in the model. There'll be things that we can learn from that we could translate into robotics.
If we can do that, if he can do that, then he knows a lot about the modules that might be present in humans that we then deploy to do even more complicated things like having language and building supple societies instead of being locked into the kind of social dynamics that honeybees are. What you can certainly say with reasonable comfort is that there are aspects of human behavior that seem to be paralleled in something like a honeybee. People must be the arbiters of morality. By no means are they suggesting that we could program a machine to give us morality. But what they suggest is that we could teach ourselves to be better if we gave ourselves new tools. So they have a variety of approaches, one of which is to suggest that we poll a lot of people. No one probably is completely right or unbiased, and you have to be very careful about whom you're asking. But over the collective, some kind of zeitgeist, some kind of moral compass emerges. That's what morality is in a community. We come to an agreement about what's the right thing to do. Unfortunately, it's extremely hard for humans to take on board what hundreds or thousands of other humans are thinking. It's just we're not built for that. We're built for dyadic interactions, for small group interactions. Machines, on the other hand, AI, on the other hand, is exquisitely suited to extracting patterns from large data sets. So if you give a machine tremendous access to human morality, the machine could extract, in some very cryptic, sort of mysterious way, could extract the essence of the contours of the collective moral mind. It can be our interlocutor, not asking to outsource our moral minds, not outsourcing our intelligences, but enriching them through a self-learning process.
How should the information that comes from the AI be presented to humans to actually influence their behavior in a way that that will be effective and useful? And that's really, in one part of my life, I think about things in a way of what would I tickle in the brain to change a moral judgment.